Now, the story of the Jews who came under Russian control is quite different. Whereas the Galician Jews were able to benefit from political liberty and political opportunities offered by the Habsburgs, the Jews in the Russian Empire were under a much stricter political regime. When Russia took over Poland during the partitions, in theory, no Jews were allowed to live there. In theory, Russia was an Orthodox Christian country that saw Jews as enemies, as Christ killers, and didn't give Jews the right to residence. And all of a sudden, this country finds itself with the biggest Jewish population in the world. The Jews didn't come to Russia, Russia came to the Jews. And the Russians didn't know what to do with these people. The Russians didn't know about the shtetl. They didn't know about the kahal. They didn't know about Jewish courts. They came into Poland. They saw the taverns. They saw the peasants getting drunk. They saw the Jews selling liquor to the peasants. They rather simple-mindedly accused the Jews of ruining the peasants' lives. An immediate Russian response was, oh my God, let's make sure that these Jews aren't allowed to move into the interior of Russia. They'll eat our poor peasants alive. They'll destroy them. And so the Russians encountered the Polish Jews with a great deal of suspicion, a great deal of hostility, and one might say a certain degree of disgust and contempt. Now, a problem was that the Empress of Russia, the woman in charge of Russia when the partitions took place, was Catherine the Great. And Catherine the Great saw herself as an enlightened monarch. And the policies that Catherine pursued towards the Jews, in a sense, were a harbinger of those contradictory policies that Russia would pursue towards the Jews right up until the late 19th century. That is an ambivalent and confused mixture of integration on the one hand and rabid suspicion on the other hand. Being an enlightened monarch, Catherine the Great, on the one hand, wanted to make the Jews into useful citizens, wanted to integrate them into the structures of the Russian state, wanted to make them economically productive. On the other hand, Catherine the Great was besieged by Russian merchants, by Russian officers, by Russian nobles who said, don't let these people come into Russia. They will wreak havoc. They will destroy us. Keeping in mind that, again, this notion, this whole social structure based on the shtetl, based on this symbiosis between the Polish nobles and the Jew, this didn't exist in the interior of Russia. And what happened was that in 1791, Catherine decreed that with a few exceptions, Jews would not be able to leave the Polish provinces and move into the Russian interior. Later on, in 1835, this was legislated as the Pale of Settlement, which meant that from that point until 1917, until the Russian Revolution, most Jews would be confined largely to those territories that used to be Poland. Now, the Pale was expanded to include South Ukraine, to include Odessa, to include Bessarabia. But by and large, the Pale was the same as the former territories of the Polish partition, with the proviso that so-called Central Poland, Congress Poland, Warsaw, Łódź, Lublin, and so on, had their own legal status and technically were not part of the Pale. Now, what this means is that from the time that Russia takes over the Polish Jews until the Russian Revolution, for the most part, the Russian Jews will be forced to live in a certain area of the country, not leave that country. That means they will continue to live on the local level as a majority population rather than a minority population. It also means that even if they want to integrate and assimilate, those opportunities will be very, very limited because if you look at the Pale and you take a Jew who in theory wants to assimilate, wants to integrate, wants to say, okay, I want to join the mainstream, the question then arises, well, duh, what mainstream am I going to join? Do I want to be a Polish or a Ukrainian peasant? No. Can I integrate with a local Polish prince? No. They won't accept me, and, I'm not that comfortable with him either. Do I want to integrate with the local middle class? Well, the local middle class happens to be Jewish, with an occasional Polish doctor here and there. Okay, I love the culture of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I want to be a Russian of the Mosaic persuasion. Well, that's not really an option either, because there aren't that many Russians actually living in the Pale. So what you have is a situation which will change, which will transform, which will morph into different scenarios. But the bottom line is that this Jewish population in the Pale will increase from 600,000 to 1 million to 3 million to 4 million. By the census of 1897, there will be over 5 million Jews in the Russian Empire, but they will be really blocked from meaningful integration with the rest of the imperial population. That will have far-reaching consequences on Jewish history. It will mean that Russian Jewry especially will become a reservoir of great national energy. At the same time, it will be a reservoir of major migration to the United States and to other countries. But those integrationist models that we see in Western Europe and the United States won't exist. Now, when one of Catherine's successors, Alexander I, tries to continue this attempt to make the Jews useful, get them out of the shtetls, make them become farmers. Well, that doesn't work. That's just pie in the sky. During the Napoleonic invasions, Russia goes through a great national awakening, a great national revival, where, by the way, there are some Hasidic rabbis who want Napoleon to lose. Why? Because they're afraid that if Napoleon wins, the Jews will be emancipated and then they'll start eating pork. Better that the Russians win and that the Jews retain their national identity. By the way, that reminds me of an old Yiddish joke, which of course is not very funny. It doesn't sound funny to us, but it gives you some idea of how many of the Jews looked at Napoleon. It was after the Battle of Austerlitz, and Napoleon was giving awards to 3 of the bravest soldiers in the French army. And there's a Polish soldier, and he's about to pin the award on him. Stash, what do you want? I want an independent Poland. You will get it. Salutes. Next soldier is a German soldier. Heinz, what do you want? An independent and united Germany. You will have it. Salutes. The third soldier is a Jew, Chaim. Chaim, what do you want? I want a roll and a little piece of herring. Contempt, outrage, scorn. This is all you want, you little Jew? And Chaim says, a roll and a piece of herring I'll get. We'll see what they get. But this is an example of the Jewish ambivalence towards all of these political promises.